Can you start over? I'm sorry, guys.
No, that's fine. Here we go. So, again, I'm Michael Rubis. Welcome to this presentation put on by the Friends of the Page Walker as part of the celebration of Cary's 150th anniversary. So what we'll be talking about today within the next 15 minutes or so is a history of the grocery stores that were in downtown. A lot of people ask these days, why are there no grocery stores downtown? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the history of what was here, what lasted, what didn't last, and how shopping downtown for groceries has changed over the years. Now, back when Frank Page bought the 300 acres of land to make Cary in 1854, one of the first things he did was set up the sawmill, because Frank was a lumberman, and set up a general store. So for the first 15 or 20 years that Frank had started to set up the town, he was the only general store. Around just before 1900, Frank built what he called the cotton factory, which is located right where the fire department is now. Because Cedar Street at that time, the road that runs down next to the railroad, was actually called Railroad Street. And that was the primary main street of town. From a newspaper article in 1875, this is a drawing of what Frank's three-story cotton factory looked like. Within that building, there was his general store, there was the post office, there was an undertaker, there was the minister, the church office. Basically, it was the 19th century version of a shopping mall. So it's that facing the railroad, and you can see in the distance there was the hotel that Frank built, the Page Walker Hotel. Frank's house actually set back over behind where Town Hall is now. Just to give you kind of a view, this is an artist's representation of what the town looked like around 1900. Kind of show you where we are. There's the three-story building that was the cotton factory, which is where the fire station is today. This is Cedar Street, which was then called Railroad Street. There's the Walker Hotel. Some of the stores we'll be talking about. Just down on Railroad Street was the Wiley Jones store. There was Waldo Drugs next to it. Had a blacksmith down at the end. Up and down Harrison Street, here on the corner where I'm standing right now, was the Guess Ogle store. Next to that was where the Gray family had their house and a store, general store. Down Chatham Street a little bit was Scott's general store. We'll talk about that one a bit. To kind of get you oriented, here is the Methodist Church, and actually not represented here, but between the Methodist Church and Chatham Street, there was another store called the Corner Store. So even in 1900, there were quite a few stores, general stores and grocery stores here in downtown. By 1900, Cary had about 300 people in town. And again, Railroad Street was the main street. Now this local artist, Jerry Miller, we talked about Scott's store up on Chatham Street. Local artist Jerry Miller has a wonderful series of pen and ink drawings of historic buildings in downtown, along with some of the houses in downtown. And he drew this one to demonstrate what Scott's store would look like around 1890 with the office building next to it. So Scott's was definitely one of the big players, along with the cotton factory, around 1900 or so, when the town was really getting going. Just for comparison, it's not a great picture, but now Scott's store building existed until 1980 when it was torn down. It's tough to tell, but this picture was taken in the late 1970s when the building was still there. And we'll walk past that spot up on Chatham Street in a few minutes. Now, the early 1900s was a really good time for grocery stores in downtown. Things were thriving. Business was booming. You have to keep in mind how different things.
Are we going to walk?
What?
Are we going to walk?
Well, we'll walk shortly. In just a minute, how different things were in terms of shopping then. Most folks in town still had a vegetable garden in their yard. Most folks even had not cows, but chickens. They had a couple calves, even pigs in downtown as late as 1900. By 1900 or so, let's see, there were, just to list some of the stores, not only was it the Wiley Jones store down on Chatham, there were two Jones stores that were so popular. There were the Wilder store, the Lynn store. The biggest store of all around that time, between 1900 to say 1920, sorry, step back a second, the cotton factory burned down around 1910 or so. So that obviously was no longer then a store. The store that really took its place as the biggest one in town was the Gray brothers. In fact, let's walk up here toward Fidelity Bank now, because where the Fidelity Bank here is at the corner of Chatham and Academy is where the Gray brothers store was. So then from when it was founded in 1900 up until about 1939 when it closed, and it was the biggest one in town. It was one of the first stores in town to get phone service. So in fact, here, let's take a look at the picture again. There's a couple things. Sorry? Oh. So we're kind of in the same spot where this picture was taken. And we know the picture was taken sometimes in the 1930s because Gray's store is still open. You can see the corner of the Ashworth building in that picture, and Ashworth was built in 1931. So clearly the picture was taken between after 1931, before 1939. Now, it was F.R. Gray and brother, which always was kind of funny to me because it wasn't F.R. Gray and Dave or Fred, it was just brother. There's got to be a story there, but I just don't know why the brother was simply listed as brother. Another really interesting thing to note about this picture is that it lists the phone number outside, phone 16. So at that point, you dial 16 to get the Gray brothers. Now, if you've watched any of the old Andy Griffith shows, and they would, Andy would pick up the phone and say, Sarah, get me Floyd's barbershop, or, Sarah, get me the mayor, or whatever. We didn't have Sarah in Cary. Well, I wasn't around. They didn't have Sarah. They had Central in a little building just up Academy Street on the right, just before you get to where the Baptist church is now. They ran the Central switchboard for town. So you would pick up the phone and say, Central, get me the Gray brothers, or Central, dial Rogers' store for me. So it's kind of interesting how things have changed over the years. Now, most of these stores were also doing deliveries. Most people didn't have cars at that time. They would call the store, they would make an order, and they would deliver via a bicycle, horse even at that time, or whatever they had. So by 1930, there were 7 grocery stores running up and down Chatham Street and over on what was still called Railroad Street at the time, but 7 grocery stores. This is why at the time, Cary was referred to as that little town that was nothing but grocery stores. And there's a very good reason why it had so many grocery stores. There were still only 400 or so people in town, more grocery stores than could be supported by that number of people. But the Highway Improvement Act of 1921 changed all of that. The federal government decided we're going to route US 1 and US 64 right through Cary, and Chatham Street was the route for US 1 and US 64. So we had lots of people traveling up and down Chatham Street, and these people needed food, they needed a place to stop, and so the grocery stores sprung up to support those. You may even remember just outside of town on Chatham Street, there used to be the remnants of a few of those one-story motels that were built to cater to travelers moving up and down US 1 and US 64. Even a little further out, right where Cary meets Apex, you might remember there used to be a way station, and that was on Old Apex Road. Because again, even the trucks are moving up and down through town. Now this, to me, is a great picture. This is looking down Chatham Street to the west in the mid-1920s. Here you can see Scott's store on the left. We were just talking about that. Here's Everybody's store, which we'll talk about shortly. And we're looking just behind us here would be where the Chatham Wine Street Market is now, and Douglas Real Estate. So the Everybody store still exists. It's still there, and we'll get down closer to it and talk about it shortly. But of course, Scott's is gone, and the stores adjacent to Ashworth are of course still there. it's worth mentioning, even at this point, since we're only really talking about stores right here in downtown, there was, over on what is now Highway 54 by the Kingswood subdivision, there was a store called Terrell's that was primarily for African Americans. A lot of the African Americans had settled in that part of town. And Terrell's, like the other stores, were largely they did a lot of credit-based. People would call in and say, I need this, that, and then they'd pay their bill by the end of the month. So in the 20s and 30s, the grocery store scene here was largely dominated by Gray's and the cotton factory before it burned down. Late into the 30s, into the 40s, even into the early 50s, it was really dominated by three stores. There was Rogers Grocery Store, Hobby's Grocery Store, and Denning's. I wonder if we should step under the raining on us.
You keep talking faster because it's going to start.
Okay, so we'll stay here for a bit. So Glen Hobby opened a grocery store in what is now Chatham Street Wine Market in the late 1930s. At 105B, next to Ashworth, Lemuel Rogers opened his grocery store. And then just down the street, we can see where the mural is on the side of the Everybody store. That's where Milton Denning had opened his store. So by 1940, you had the Dennings running their store, Rogers running the one at 105B, and Glen Hobby running the one at Chatham Street. It's a great picture from around 1940, and that is what is now the Chatham Street Wine Market, where Glen Hobby was running his store. And I can put all these pictures online if there is an interest. So just some of the history about the store. Like Rogers' store there, Rogers had gotten his start by going into Raleigh to the farmer's market with his truck, buying produce, bringing it back and selling it from his truck. He did well enough doing that. He was able to open his store there. His son, Billy, was his primary delivery guy, and Billy would tell stories about he would be able to bike as far north as Reedy Creek Road to deliver groceries. That's about as far as he could get in a day and get back. Again, it was a very different time because people would they'd call in, they'd make their orders almost every day, and they were delivering. It was, if you know of the Herb Young Center here in town, there's a great story that Billy tells about Herb Young, where as a young man, Herb Young would catch rabbits in downtown, bring them to the Rogers store, and trade them to Mr. Rogers for a can, fresh caught rabbit. So here's a good picture. This is looking down Chatham Street toward Raleigh. We can see here's on the side, there's Dennings is showing, there's his store, and there's got Hobbies painted on the side of his store. They had a lot of Fireman's Day parades and stuff back in the 50s. It was very interesting. So, kind of good view from there. I'm getting a little drizzle, but it's not too bad. Here's another view from a different Fireman's Day plate. You can see Scott's store is still there, although it was not a store at that time. Dennings is just off screen. Hobbies is converted to appliances. He's taken over the shop next to him, and both of his are appliances. We see that Rogers is gone and been replaced by Lowe's. I like it's interesting, you can still see the Mason sign hanging from the sign up first, because again, Ashworth was built as a Mason's lodge. So, we'll talk a little bit about this in the show now. So while Glen Hobby was running his store there at the Wine Street Market, he did well enough in the 1940s that he actually purchased the lot 4 down where the kitchen and bath store is now. He purchased that lot and built that building. It had been the Mr. Mr. Kataris, I believe, lived in that spot and had a shoe repair business in his house. Glen Hobby bought it, built that, and in 1950 leased it to Piggly Wiggly. So in June of 1950, Piggly Wiggly opened in that spot and became the first supermarket in downtown. In fact, here's a picture that shows a lot of what happened in a couple of years there. Hobbies is now running both of those. Rogers' store is gone. Dennings is behind us, but still running. But you can see they got the Piggly Wiggly sign hanging on the side of the store. So Rogers, seeing the writing on the wall by that point, had closed his store, had bought a restaurant, or bought a building to make a restaurant just down the road where the Crosstown Pub is now. He held that as a restaurant for about 3 or 4 years until he took the restaurant across the street, where he also ran Rogers Motel, and it's now a hair salon, but for years that was Rogers Motel. Now, so we talked about the Rogers family running the stop at 105B, Glenn Hobby running the one at where that's the what this truck go by. Where Glenn Hobby was running the one at the wine market, and now Glenn Hobby is running both the wine market and 107 as his appliance store. He's leased out the building on the corner to Piggly Wiggly. Rogers has moved to the restaurant business. The Dennings are still there in what was the old Everybody store running. Now again, here's another picture. This is fabulous. Again, from local artist Jerry Miller, who drew these series of ink and pen and ink building pictures from around town. And this was the Dennings grocery store. Now, I don't want to get that one wet, so I'll put it back here and talk about it for a second. And the building was built by G.H. Jordan in the early 1920s, who then leased it to the Dennings as a store. We'll hear more about the Jordan family later. They've been very prominent in the development of businesses in downtown. There's Jordan Hall north of town, a lot of people may have seen, that was on land donated by the Jordan family to the town. So we can walk this way a little bit. G.H. Jordan built the building that became the Everybody's store, which then Milton Denning was running through the 1930s and 1940s. So at this point, it's 1950, Piggly Wiggly's running there. Dennings suffered a health issue in the late 40s. The shop there closed for a couple of years, but then his son, Joe, reopened the store and called it Grocery Boys. So now, we've got Grocery Boys running here in the early 50s. We've got Piggly Wiggly. Let me step here under the side just a second. It's starting to rain on us a little bit, folks. We can talk here and then show for a second. All right, so we're gonna let this dump truck go by. We're in downtown. There's live action. So again, Hobby is now running just 2 appliance stores in 107 and 111. He's also leased out to Piggly Wiggly, where Kitchen Body Works are. Dennings is running the store there. Now, Piggly Wiggly, though, only lasted for about 3 years in that spot. Winn-Dixie comes in, buys out that Piggly Wiggly franchise, and so by 1954, what was Piggly Wiggly's is now Winn-Dixie. So Winn-Dixie is still there. Joe Denning is now running the Grocery Boys store, and we've got those 2 markets basically competing with each other. By 1958, Winn-Dixie had outgrown that spot and built the building that houses La Farm Bakery now, down at the corner of Harrison and Chatham. So in 1958, Winn-Dixie moves down to there. And in fact, they were only in that spot for about 4 or 5 years before they doubled the size of the store. Their business was so well for Winn-Dixie, they expanded that size. So I'm out of order here for a second here. Sorry. Jump around.
We're gonna walk down this one?
We will in just a moment. There's a couple pictures. I don't want to get wet here, so get that. Yeah, we're good. Okay. We're good. Okay, yeah. So now the Dennings, to me, it was a very interesting story because Joe Denning, seeing the writing on the wall, he's got Winn-Dixie running down beside him. Yeah, decided that he's going to move his store. So Denning sells the grocery boy store. They built the store that is down at the corner of Maynard and Chatham, which for a while, again, was the grocery boys. Eventually, it was also a seafood restaurant, and it's currently the site of where Patel Brothers has the store. But out of all of the ones that were stores here, the Denning family really, I think, had the best vision. Because as the story goes, Joe Denning is on vacation in Florida, and he sees a smaller grocery store, and he has an idea. So he comes back, and so here they're still running Dennings in this store. And it's kind of a neat little anecdote that, this is the 1950s when this is going on. And they're living above the store, he and his wife and their kids, while they run the grocery store and the business down below. And because they've got small kids, the kids, the wife's working in the store, they put up a playpen in the butcher department because Granddad was the butcher. So Granddad's butchering and selling meat, and he's also watching the kids. So again, so Denning's on vacation in Florida in the mid-1960s. He gets the idea for a smaller store. So he comes back to the wife and talk about it, and around 1968, over on Blue Ridge Road, next to what will become eventually Rec Hospital, he opens the first convenience store in Wake County. He calls it Grocery Boys Jr. Now, he was a pretty smart businessman. One of his friends in town is a guy named Cary. Cary was the head of Cary Oil. We'll walk down here and step in the alley. So Harry comes to Joe and says, Harry, I've got this idea for your convenience store you've just built on Blue Ridge. Let's take a pair of self-serve gas pumps, put them out front of the store. So you've got all these people that are coming in, buying things put to go, they can also buy gas. Joe said it sounds like a great idea. They do it. It's an instant success and pretty much establishes the model for every convenience store that's in Wake County today, where there's a gas pump out front. You can go in and get the few essential items that you need, and there you go. I missed one we got to talk about. Here we go. I got to step back for just a second. Because we talked about this building we're standing next to here, which was originally the Everybody Store, which was built by G.H. Jordan in the 1920s. In the late 1950s, his son, C.Y. Jordan, built a grocery store at the far end of town where Walker Street is, where Walker hits Chatham. In fact, when that opened in 1960, so in 1960, the first A&P opens in downtown Cary. Again, that was at the corner of Walker and Chatham. Right now, that building is still there, and it's housed the Perfect Piece furniture store. So by 1960 or so, we've got Winn-Dixie running there at that end where the La Farm is now. We've got A&P at the other end of downtown. We've still got Dennings running here in the middle, shortly to be moved down to where Patel Brothers is there. And that was really kind of the last big hurrah. When Dennings moved out to where the Patel Brothers is, that was the last mom and pop store really in downtown. But by 1971, 72, when Joe Denning retired, there were 18 Grocery Boy Juniors in Wake County. He had done quite well. And in fact, his children, who were the same kids who had been playing in the playpen in the behind the butcher's counter with Granddad, were the ones that took over running the business. But then the 80s and 90s were a hard time for grocery stores in downtown. By the mid-1980s,
Hold still.
Sorry?
Hold still.
Hold still, my director. By the mid-1980s, the A&P had closed. People were moving more out into the suburbs. People weren't living as much in downtown. By 1990, The Winn-Dixie had closed. The Sorrell family bought that store and turned it into Sorrell Paint and Wallpaper, which many of you may remember. In fact, here's a picture I like. It shows a view from standing in front of the Ivy Ellington house, looking down toward the Winn-Dixie. And this is, judging by that Ford LTD, 77, 78 time frame. Oh, we're in the alley, cars coming. Let's step this way. An interesting thing I think about this picture is you'll notice that the parking lot there is big. There's quite a bit of a place to park cars. It's because Harrison had not moved yet by 78. I think it moved in 83. They took Harrison and slid it about 100 feet toward the building that houses La Farm now. Because originally Harrison did not line up with the other part of Harrison. So again, by the late 1980s, Piggly Wiggly, A&P had closed. By 1990, the Winn-Dixie had closed, become Sorrell. There, at that point, really wasn't a grocery store downtown. Like even now, there's a convenience store up there across from the train station. There's the convenience store, the parking shop way down at the other by the the Eastern Roundabout. The Grocery Boy Jr. that was at the Western Roundabout was actually recently just torn down. I'm not sure what's going in that spot. But anyway, let's take a quick recap. This is a map that I think is pretty interesting. To orient you, 14 is Cary Academy. 1, here's Winn-Dixie. There's the A&P. So you can see that a lot of the grocery store action really happened right in the intersection of Academy, Chatham, and then Cedar Railroad Street. You can also see that my map was drawn before Harrison was moved over to intersect what was Connor Street and became Harrison Street. So there's the Scott store, Ashworth, the Rogers, the hobby store, Piggly Wiggly, Gray Brothers, the Guess Ogle store, the original Frank Page store. So over the years, there have been quite a few in downtown. There aren't now. But walking out here with a little grass. So that's really about it. And you can see that during the 1900s, it was really dominated by the cotton factory and grays. Then through the 30s and 40s, it was the Denning, the Moore, Mr. Moore, Rogers store, Rogers store, and Lynn Hobby store. So anyway, that's pretty much where we're at. Welcome to downtown. Thank you so much for watching. I'll try and stick the image. And that's about it. Thanks for watching.